Well, thank you for coming out. Welcome to the National Museum of African Art. My name is Glenn Ojeda and I work at the Education Department. It is a joy to have with us today this full audience. And this is a very special occasion for us because we are celebrating the cuisine, the history, the culinary traditions of the Indian Ocean as part of our Connecting the Gems of the Indian Ocean project from Oman to East Africa. Let me see. And this is part of a larger project that the museum has been engaged in over the last couple of years, a project that is possible through the generosity of the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center here in Washington, D.C. I want to recognize the presence of Kathleen Ridolfo, director of the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center, and of her staff. We are very thankful to have you here. I also want to recognize our staff here at the museum, the Education Department, James Parker, Vanessa Jones. I want to recognize very especially Nicole Shivers. She's the curator for the project and she's one of our education specialists. We are here because of her vision and the direction that she gives this project. So thank you for coming out. For the main event, we will hear from Felicia Campbell, author of The Food of Oman. And this is the second time that we welcome Felicia to the museum. We had her here about a year ago for our cultural roundtables, discussing the arts and crafts of the Indian Ocean. We welcome Felicia. She is a IACP Bert Green nominated writer. She's the former travel editor at Savor, a nationally acclaimed food and travel magazine based in New York City. And she's currently the executive features editor at the Times of Oman, based in Oman. She holds a master's degree from New York University in food and culture with an emphasis on the Middle East, a region that she fell in love with while serving as a United States soldier in Iraq in 2003. Over the last decade, she has studied, lived, and traveled extensively throughout the region. Felicia likes to write about culture, travel, food, spirits, history, and a whole variety of publications. The Food of Oman, which you will hear about today, is the first English language Omani cookbook, and it will be available for sale during the presentation and afterwards. I'm sure Felicia will be glad to sign your copy at the end. After her presentation, we will open up for Q&A, and we will enjoy the typical dishes prepared by Chef Shaban from Dar es Salaam. During the presentation, we encourage you to tweet, take pictures. We are happy to have with us Raven and Amanda from the Brown Girls Museum blog, and we want to make this a social media friendly environment. So we hope you enjoy the presentation. Welcome, Felicia.
Thanks, Glenn, and thank you so much for having me. It was really fun coming down here last year and talking about Oman and Omani food, and I'm really excited to do it again. As he mentioned, I first was introduced to the Middle East about 12 years ago when I was deployed there as a 19-year-old soldier. So I knew absolutely nothing about the region. I had no idea what to expect. And when I got there, I might as well have been on a different planet. And so over the year that I spent there, I became completely fascinated with the culture and the people there, and just humbled by the fact that despite the fact we were all holding weapons and invading their country, they were so hospitable. And the one time I was actually able to learn a little bit about the people there was when we would go into the cafes and sit with the cafe owners and have tea and eat with them. So over the years that followed, when I started studying the Middle East, food became my gateway because it's such an intimate point of connection. So I was lucky enough to be able to study and live in Lebanon, and I reported in the Gulf in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and spent time in Turkey. And so I traveled a lot in the Middle East, and I thought I really knew the region. And when I was working at Saveur, I had the opportunity to go do a feature in Yemen. I was really excited. So I was like, this is a part of the Middle East that most people aren't talking about, and I want to give, more of this human perspective. But my friend who was living there, he bailed. He was like, you know what, it's getting too dicey here, don't come. So I didn't know what to do. So I started looking at a map of the Middle East. I was like, where am I gonna go? What am I gonna look at? And I saw Oman. And I knew it was there, but I never thought about it. And I couldn't conjure up any images of what it might look like, what the food was like. I thought, it's probably kind of the same as the food in Saudi or in the UAE. So I started Googling. I started trying to find more information about it, and there was almost nothing out there. So I found a blog called Omani Cuisine, and it was a bunch of restaurant reviews. Sushi restaurants, burger joints, pizza places in Muscat. And I was like, okay, maybe it's like Dubai. There's a lot of international places. But I emailed the blogger, and I asked him, I was like, well, is there local food there? Is there anything really distinctive? And he wrote back to me and started describing these foods like fried cardamom breads and these really intricate curries that weren't spicy. They were with coconut milk and lime and chilies. And it was this food that it was nothing like any other Middle Eastern food I'd ever heard of. So I was really intrigued. And thankfully, my boss at the time at Saveur, he was like, okay, you can go, but only if you take the free press trip to Dubai next week. I was like, oh, okay. So again, I ended up on a plane going to a part of the Middle East that I couldn't even imagine. And I got off the plane in Muscat, and I was just blown away. This is the Corniche that runs along the old part of the city. And I found these foods that were these amazing mashups of like South Asian biryanis and curries and Indonesian coconut milk curries and East African vegetables with hot chilies and limes. Lots of seafood and these really diverse people. That the diversity of the food and the place were really reflected in their complexions. You had people who looked like they had African origin, some that looked like they had Persian origin, some from South Asia, and they were very private about their family lives. They were very open about sharing their culture, and I totally fell in love. So I came back and I started doing some more research, digging into it, and there was very little written about the food. There were a couple self-published English language cookbooks that I found there, but not much commercially available. And so what I ended up finding most helpful was studying the trade routes. Turns out that Oman was at one time the most powerful trading empire in the entire world. They had ports in South Asia, in Persia, in Zanzibar, and they traded all the way to East Asia. And so this map that we had drawn for the book, these are all typical ingredients that they use in their cooking. And this is the origin of all those ingredients. So it kind of paints a nice picture of how globally connected they were and have been for centuries. So you have this culture that's really rooted in their own traditions, a lot of Bedouin tribal traditions, but with this great openness and curiosity about the world, because these were the traders of the ancient times, seafarers and overland caravan traders. And so that created this cuisine that's unlike anything else I'd ever encountered. So I kept going back, and it's not the kind of place where you can send an email and get information. People are incredibly helpful, but they're not going to answer you in an email. So I would go back and I would meet one friend and sit with them, and we would have Omani coffee, which is this beautiful light roasted coffee that's infused with rose water and cardamom, sometimes saffron. And we would just talk, and eventually they would invite me to come home with them to cook with their mother or their cousin, or introduce me to another friend. And I started bringing my best friend Dawn with me to help me out, because when we would ask them, so what goes into this dish? They'd say, well, spices. Typical spices, of course. And I said, okay, so like what? And they'd start listing, and they'd say, oh, well, maybe some of this, maybe some of that, because so it's still a very organic cooking style that's been passed down from mothers and grandmothers to daughters. But the younger generations, a lot of the women there that I'm friends with, they're not quite so interested in cooking anymore. They're more interested in, going to school or starting their careers, and so their mothers and grandmothers are teaching these cooking skills to their maids. So a lot of these dishes they didn't know how to make. So it's kind of fun being with them and them kind of learning what went into the foods that they grew up eating too. So we would go, and Dawn would just stand there over the stove and watch every ingredient that went into the pot and take copious notes. And I would talk to these ladies about their families and their lives and kind of the stories behind the dishes. And then we'd come back to New York, and we'd try to turn those notes into recipes, and we'd test them and taste them, and until they reminded us of Oman. And so I went back and forth between New York and Oman for about 2 years doing this, and we were just so blessed to be invited into homes from the very far north, which is a place called Barami, to the far south, the former capital of Salalah. And we learned all these different regional dishes and put them together in this book. So it's by no means an exhaustive, encyclopedia of all the dishes, because there's just incredible diversity there. It's just an introduction to the foods that were shared with us. And in the book, only about half of it is recipes, and the rest of it is, history of the ingredients, which I think is kind of the history of the place, and stories about these amazing people that welcomed us into their homes and their kitchens. So that's it, you guys. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
What do you think is the major characteristics or distinguishments of Oman food versus Indian versus at least like any spice or cooking techniques or ingredients, or what makes it Oman food?
Well, compared to Middle Eastern food, it's got a lot more spices. It's not particularly spicy like South Asian food. In fact, when you make a dish a little bit too spicy, like, oh, this is Indian food. They do use chilies, but more for the flavor than for the heat. Like they seed them, or they don't let the chilies burst. But they use like a lot of cloves, cardamom. A really unusual ingredient is called black lime. And they now use it in Persian cooking and in Iraqi cooking. But it originated in Oman, where they brought true limes from Indonesia, and so that they needed to preserve them so they wouldn't go bad when they were trading them. So they would lay them out on mats and dry them. And it created this whole new ingredient that if you break it open, the inside flesh is still chewy and it's tart and a little bit fermented tasting. Really wonderful. And they use that in a lot of their dishes. So I would say the most distinctive part of it is the amount of spices. Yeah.
How did you end up meeting the people that invited you to their home?
Well, that same blogger who I first got in touch with, he was like, sure, come out. I'm going out of town though. So here's the email addresses of 5 of my friends. It's like, okay. So I started messaging them, and they gave me what I soon learned was a very Omani response. To say, okay, well, can we meet on this day at this time? They say, oh, call me when you get here. Okay, so it was like a lot of it was just by faith. You just show up and you call and you hope they're available, and I would meet them, and it's amazing. Some of them who didn't think they had anything to contribute, they were like, well, I'm not really a food person, I don't cook that much. But I'd sit and talk to them, and food's such an an innate part of their life that they knew so much about their food, and their mothers were amazing about opening up their homes for us to cook with them, and they were really excited to share this piece of their culture. And the more they talked about it, the less of like kind of a banal everyday thing it became. It was something they were really proud of. And so one led to another, and one of the greatest resources was this history professor at Sultan Qaboos University, who he really loved the idea of this project. So he would grab his students and be like, "Hey, does your mother cook?" And he'd be like, "You should take her home with you." And that was kind of my entry point to the interior, to these villages, where they'd be like, "All right, come home with me." So it's fun.
Yeah. What's typical cooking method? What's typical meal for breakfast, lunch, dinner? Is there a staple?
There is. If you don't have rice at lunch, you haven't eaten. That is their main meal of the day, and it's always a big platter of rice. And the rice is basmati, so they get it from South Asia, and it's layered with a lot of different spices. A lot of times they will boil meat or chicken and then cook the rice in it, and then they cook the meat again. Like they'll boil the chicken and then fry it. Nothing is wasted. And everyone eats around a big communal tray, traditionally, on the floor, which is a really nice way to eat. Everybody gets what they want. They eat their fill. That's the main meal. Usually, like on a Friday, the whole family gathers to have this kind of meal. And it starts off with fresh cut fruit and sometimes halwa, which is an Omani sweet. It's sugar and cornstarch cooked with ghee. Becomes almost like a jelly. Very sweet and gelatinous, but you eat just a little spoonful of that with this black coffee, have your fruit, then have your rice, and then after that's finished and you think the meal is over, it is not. Then some more coffee comes out and dates and sometimes sweets, because these meals are a time to just sit and be with your big extended family. Breakfast and dinner are almost interchangeable sometimes. There's dishes like balalit, which they also have in the Emirates, where it's vermicelli noodles that are cooked in like a sugar syrup and topped with salted egg. It's delicious. So they'll eat that for breakfast or for dinner, or a lot of these breads, like fried breads, or there's a cracker-like bread in the south that they put in nigella seeds and cardamom. It's called kak. And they eat that with very sweet, milky tea. Yeah. And a cooking method, they cook things for a long time. It's about patience. Like the one dish that I think is such a perfect example of that is spinach. It's spinach with coconut. And it's edible almost immediately because it's just spinach. It's vegan. But if you let it go the whole 35 to 40 minutes, where it's simmering with chilies and onions and coconut milk, it develops this really rich, savory flavor. And you just have to be patient and let it go. And they're very good about that. And then their bread is really interesting. Their traditional Omani bread, it's paper thin, and they just have a big flat griddle. And these ladies are so good at it. I don't know how they don't burn their knuckles off, because I certainly did when I was testing it. But you take handfuls of this very like elastic dough, and you just press it to the searing hot metal griddle. And you take a paint chipper and chip it off. And you don't think you're going to have anything left, but it works. You peel it right off, and it's paper thin, and you can either eat it like that with the rice, or they break it up and put it under a stew called saluna. For almost a savory bread pudding. So that one's a really traditional, special Omani technique.
How much time did you spend there? And you mentioned a university. Did you do other things, or do they combine it with entertainment? What other kinds of activities did you do while you were there?
I was on a mission, because I did not have a whole lot of time. I was still working, full time at the magazine here in New York. So I would go for anywhere between two weeks to a month at a time. and try to pack in as much testing and recipe collecting as possible, and then I'd come back here and work, and then I'd fly back over. So in the last year of the book, I think I was in Oman 7 or 8 times in a year. And when I was finishing it, I spent the last 2 months there. And I've been living there since last December.
How long did the process of your book take from beginning to end?
Well, I first went there to do the article. That was kind of the beginning. And then I went back to shoot the feature with a photographer. But after that, I realized there was just too much there for one article. And because so little had been written on it, I really felt compelled to do a book. So I put together a proposal of my ideas and gave it to a publisher in, I think it was January, and I delivered the book the following January. So it was a very busy year.
Felicia, can you talk a little bit about the differences in cooking between the north and the south, or the coast and the interior? What differences do you see? Because we know there are kind of different styles and different things that people eat in the various regions of Oman.
Yeah, the south is probably the most different, right down here close to Yemen. It's called Dhofar. And that area, they have a really unique culinary culture. They are big meat eaters. I mean, everyone is, but they especially are passionate about meat. Like, one of their favorite things is a thing called majin, where it's strips of beef that are salted and air dried and then fried in their own air dried fat, to where it's preserved little fried balls of meat that will last forever on your counter. And so they love that, and they have a really delicious dish called madhbi, where they take smooth river rocks from the wadis and they put them over the embers of a fire till they're sizzling hot. All they do is salt the meat or the chicken, and put it on there. And I didn't believe them. I was pestering these poor guys, just asking what else is on this, because it was so flavorful. But literally just salt and meat. And you can actually do it with a pizza stone, I found. And really, really delicious. They also have an incredible range of breads, like the cock bread I was talking about, which is kind of like a cracker. Their tea, they use, it's again this sweet karak tea, which was introduced from South Asia but is really popular there. And they put in cardamom and thyme. It's really lovely. On the coast, everywhere they eat a lot of fish. That was one of the really shocking things. Even in the interior, they love seafood, and they claim that they love it even more because it's a little bit harder to get. And traditionally in the mountains, they have date palms, and they would trade their dried dates for the seafood. And that's another really distinctive thing that they do, is they salt fish, and they call it mala, and they rinse it and then just soak it in lime with onions. So it's almost like a ceviche, except it's never raw. They eat that over rice, and it's really a lovely dish. There's a nice dish called madruba, which is a mashed chicken and rice with a lot of different spices: turmeric, cloves, cinnamon, cardamom. And on the coast and in a place called Batna, they like to do that with the salted fish. So a little bit more of that. Up on the border with the UAE, their food is a little bit more similar to the food in the Emirates, which makes sense. So like the balalit's really popular there. And their salsa, they have something called dakas, which is a smooth in texture hot sauce that's tomatoes and garlic and a little bit of chilies. And I only found that on the borders, like, interestingly, in the south, in Dhofar, and in the north, in Barami. And in between, they have kind of a chunkier salsa that uses more, like, it's still tomatoes and garlic and chili, but it's chunky. So there's, like, slight variations. But the big difference is between the different ethnicities that are there. There are the different tribes. Like the Zanzibari Omanis, who trace their roots to East Africa, they're the ones who use a lot of that coconut milk in their cooking. So they make the coconut spinach or beans simmered in coconut milk. Beautiful fish and coconut sauce. And they probably use the most vegetables of any of the tribes there. Or the most recognizable vegetables. There's vegetables in things, but it's cooked, down beyond recognition. So really nice food that they have. And then the Lawatis and the Baluchis trace their roots to South Asia and like Western Persia. And they have some really distinctive dishes too, especially the Lawati, who were the traders in Old Mutra. And they have like this interesting dumpling dish called dokri, where it's almost like a gnocchi that they simmer with tomatoes and lamb, and it's very, very mild. They use a lot less spices. Really nice. And then the people, what they call original Omanis, the ones with Bedouin roots, their main thing that they love are these rice and meat dishes. Because you can cook a huge platter of rice in that broth from the chicken and feed your whole family, and they've got big families. But even that came a lot later. So when times were lean, they could live on camel's milk and dates. But once with the introduction of rice, that was yet another way to supplement the diet and really stretch it.
Yes, I was wondering if the climate and the geography of Oman mandated that the majority of their diet and cuisine, other than meat products, would have to have been obtained through trade or import rather than being grown in the.
They do a lot of importing, but they also grow quite a bit, just not enough for export. I mean, it's amazing how many red onions they use. Like, when we were testing recipes, we had hundreds of red onions in the test kitchen because it just goes in absolutely everything. So they can grow it there. There's definitely agriculture, but the import lots there, it's like floor to ceiling onions, and these South Asian guys just bagging them because you can't get enough of them. But they do grow pretty much everything there, especially in a region called Batna. And then in the mountains, they call it Jabal Akhtar, which means green mountain. And it's these gorgeous villages. They're at the tops of cliffs, and into the cliffs it's almost stepped orchards, where they, of course, have the dates, but they also have, apricots, and even they have bananas in the south, coconut. But they do import quite a bit from India. The geography, the coastline, it's 1,500 miles of coastline, so that's pretty significant. And then there's the interior is primarily desert, and then about 25% of the country is mountainous. That's kind of the breakdown.
Can you suggest difference between, let's say, high society cuisine and poor people cuisine? Is it big, and what is it? Thank
you. Everyone really loves the same thing. They love these rice dishes, rice with the meat. I would say some of the more elite families that, like one of the wonderful women who helped me with the recipes in the book, she's part of the royal family. And the only difference really in the food that I cooked with her and the food I cooked in the interiors was when I would come to her house to not cook Omani food. Like when I would come for dinner at night, they would have a lot more international cuisine on their evening menus. But as far as the Omani food, it's very much the same across the board. Maybe just more or less meat. And how many mouths to feed. Some of the bigger families might have to do with a little less, but interestingly, it was very much the same.
I assume you brought gifts to them? And I was wondering what kind of gifts you brought. Like, did they like spices or there's American food?
Oh man, that was my worst nightmare. I would like every time before the trips, I would agonize over what to bring because they have every spice in the world. They didn't want any spices. What did I end up bringing them? Gosh, I'm trying to remember now. I would bring them like I Love New York t-shirts. I was very bad at my gifting. I was trying, but I couldn't think of things. Well, I would bring. I had so many disasters with the gifts. I brought these gorgeous little hand-painted chocolates from New York because that was a big thing at the time. And when they all had these intricate designs, I was like, these ladies, they love bling and pretty things. They'll love these. I open up my suitcase, they're completely melted. Just from like the airport to the hotel, they were destroyed. So that didn't work. Yeah, I'm still trying to think of what to bring back this trip. So if you have any ideas, I'm open.
The other part I just wanted to ask you was their weight high, or did they eat regular food so they didn't have the weight problems we have in the West?
You know, it's funny. The younger generation is kind of obsessed. Like sitting with these young guys, they would be like, I don't know why they do it. My grandpa, he basically drinks oil and ghee. I was like, oh, and they were like, I would never do that to myself. The young guys are really into fitness and bodybuilding. And the older people, not so much. In Dhofar, the ladies like to be a little bigger. It's considered more attractive. In Muscat, they watch their figures, but there's not like a weight obsession. Because like everybody kind of likes a curvy gal. I didn't see a whole lot of obesity there. I mean, I didn't do like an official survey, but I didn't see a major obesity problem, despite the fact that they're eating a lot of, you know, carbs and fat. And I think the dates are what save them, because I was wondering when I was there and eating, I was like, oh my God, it's rice and meat. I'm like blowing up. But the dates it's really an amazing fruit, and they will eat it all day as a snack, as dessert, as breakfast. It's such an important part of the diet, and they're amazing nutritionally. They're very high in fiber and in vitamins, and I think that's kind of what balances things out. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. She will be around. She will be signing books here to the back. We'll be selling them and signing books, so you can stick around, talk to Felicia, ask more questions. We also have Chef Shaban, who has prepared some of the dishes from Felicia's book. I'm gonna let him introduce them, and then you can make your way to the books and to the food.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Shabani. I'm from Dar es Salaam. I've been cooking this Hassan museum for a while. And Mr. Glenn asked me to do something different. He said, Shabani, can you make a month for it? But I checked the ingredients, pretty much the same, you know, food from Zanzibar and Dar es Salaam. So it wasn't difficult for me to follow the recipe and to make what we have. So today we have white basmati rice. We have a kebab. We have coconut spinach, which she already mentioned how we do it. Most of our dish we use coconut. And also we have beef kebab, which I marinate with tamarind, garlic, fresh garlic and ginger. And then we have chicken samosas, which I put a little bit some spice in there. And also we have the other dish you mentioned, magruba, which you make with rice and tomato and chicken. It's like a porridge, but it's not. It's really just really good. And also we have kahawa, which is coffee, Arabic coffee. The difference with that coffee, I checked the ingredients. It said Arabica, the kind of coffee. So that is available in Tanzania too. So and also you make with cardamom when you cook the coffee. So it's really have the flavor of cardamom. And also most of the time I make a chai. The chai I make pretty much similar if you go to Starbucks, called latte, but that's I make it fresh. So I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it today. And also we have the soup, what they call a seafood soup. So kind of spicy with tuna fish and onions, garlic. So it's really, you'll enjoy it today. So that's what you have today. So I'm sure you'll enjoy it today. Thank you.